Welcome to Frazier and Deeter's Culture of Compliance podcast series. I'm Sabrina Serafin, partner and national leader of Frazier and Deeter's process, risk, and governance practice. Today, we're talking about the 4 critical steps to cyber readiness, and our guests are Skeet Spillane and Tim Martin of Pillar Technologies. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have a strategy that focuses on loss, not cost prevention. With so many organizations that are struggling to manage expenses, talk to us about why this is so important.
Well, that's a great question. And you know, it really kind of starts with how you view cybersecurity and the whole idea about loss prevention versus cost prevention. You know, obviously cost kind of has a budgetary emphasis, and, you know, do we have the funds in the budget? What we really try to open up that view and expand that conversation around, let's focus on, you know, what's the bigger cost? Is it, you know, controlling a cost up front or the loss down the road? So it forces them into a conversation and a thought process of, it's a business decision and not just a technology decision. So it really begins to evaluate how you connect people, process, and technology, all the moving parts that really go into an effective cybersecurity strategy. So we want them to focus on more than just technology. It's not just an exterior perimeter defense or set of tools or suite of tools. It is an entire strategy on how you build that into your policies and procedures. How do you build that into employee behavior? But also how you include that into the technology technology tools, I guess, that you select. But because we take them through that process, the interesting outcome is a very tight focus on targeting their spending. So it's a better use of their budgetary dollars and how they're spending their money, where they're spending, what's the most effective form of defense, and the strategies that they decide on as an organization. Because cybersecurity, cyber attacks, it affects every domain of the business, across the business. So it makes sense to incorporate the entire organization in that whole defense strategy.
We understand you have a 4-step process that you recommend for cyber readiness. Can you walk our listeners through the steps?
Absolutely. So the way we look at this through, as Tim was speaking to our philosophy, we start off with really wanting to understand what information you're trying to protect. What are the critical assets to your organization? Are they protected information? Are they PHI in the healthcare space? Are they intellectual property? What are the assets that really make your business unique and create exposure for your organization? And then also, what do those really mean to you financially? So you really understand the quantification of those assets with regard to your operations and your reputation. That really, answering that first piece is fundamental and foundational in how you're actually going to structure all of your controls and how you're going to actually build your defense in depth strategy so that you actually create a multi-layered protection posture. So once you understand that kind of moves you into the second phase of where we look at, where you're looking really, what is the effectiveness of my cyber controls? You know, as I'm looking at my assets, do I have the right levels of protection around them? And have I created tools that are effectively reducing my risk within there? And that really is fundamentally based on what are the threats that are coming at me and what are my vulnerabilities that I have that exist. And those are not just vulnerabilities in terms of patching levels or risks to a specific server, but they're more of a people, process, and technology vulnerability, where if you have a large number of users in your organization, you by definition increase the probability of attack just by having a large number of users, because there's more points of attack to be managed. So in context of that, you now need to really build your cyber controls to ensure that they're effective at protecting and reducing those vulnerabilities to a manageable level. The third piece that we look at is, can you really take those two components and ultimately calculate what your cyber exposure is? So once you understand your assets, where they sit in your organization and your cyber controls and what the efficacy of those controls are, you can then start to really calculate your cyber risk exposure. And the cyber risk exposure takes those into account and really defines what your residual risk is. And from understanding that residual risk, you can then actually go back and determine what your best strategy to improve your security posture will be. Is it to actually transfer that risk into a cyber risk policy, or is it actually better to spend some of those dollars and efforts into increasing the efficacy of those cyber controls? And all of this boils down to our fourth point, which is being prepared for a breach. A breach is really more of a when than an if scenario. Today, a lot of organizations are under attack from a variety of threat vectors, whether it's through malware or ransomware, or from insider information being exposed, and you need to be prepared to respond to that appropriately. Can you identify it? Do you have the ability to understand it? And do you have the ability to really investigate, determine, and then remediate the loss quickly so that you can minimize the exposure, but also maintain the confidence of your customers and clients in context of it occurring? Because how you respond has a lot to do with the long-term outcomes of a breach.
One thing I would add to that, Skeet, if you don't mind, is thinking about too, kind of preparing for a loss, is that understand that a breach is imminent. You know, Skeet talked about it, it's a matter of when, not if, and that understanding and quantifying that risk to a point where you can then figure out, you can determine what's my best point of attack there. How do I best mitigate that risk? Do I increase my effectiveness, my controls effectiveness, or do I transfer that risk into maybe an insurance vehicle? So maybe it's a third party insurance, cyber insurance policy. Maybe it's a captive insurance company that you have in place or that you want to create. So there's some creative ways to transfer that risk, but it's all about understanding too and quantifying that risk, understanding what your exposure is in that, and then best prepared to respond to a breach and reduce the impact, the financial impact of that loss.
So once we get through blocking and tackling, talk to us about Pillar Technologies and your approach to further addressing cyber risk.
You know, that's a magic question. Everybody wants to kind of flip a switch and turn cybersecurity on, and it's where we really begin is understanding where you are currently. What is your current security posture? What do you have in place? Understanding, kind of walking through those 4 steps, walking them through those 4 steps and helping them understand, you know, what is my attack surface? I mean, how big is it? And you think about that as well. So really it's beginning with an end in mind, but understanding what your current security posture is, and then how do you move it forward, assessing those gaps, and then remediating those gaps, and then how do you move it forward? That's really where we're best at helping, providing guidance in that whole conversation. So that's at the leadership level. That's at, you know, that drills down into the technical, into the implementation, into policies and procedure development, into employee awareness training. So it's really building that cyber safe culture that again connects all the moving parts of people, process, and technology. So that really is understanding where that jumping off point is. That's the best place to start. And we've got a very easy process for initiating that and to guide them through the 4 steps.
And I would add to that, Tim, that the way we've structured our services model is in 3 main categories. Assessment, really identifying what your real risks are, understanding whether you have technical risks, whether you have any process or people-related risks, getting those really quantified, identifying remediation plans, which moves into our second area of services, which is really helping the organization to have the expertise to deliver the effective remediation controls, and then ultimately being able to operate that going forward, which is our third area of expertise, whether it's in a virtual CISO, fractional CISO type of environment, or on into more of the operational security processes and technologies to ensure that you're able to continue in force once you've actually established a security posture.
Could you elaborate?
Absolutely. So our virtual CISO offering is designed on two parts. One is from a subject matter expertise to be able to really bring you the broad experience-based view of security, what it means to an organization, and do that in context of the business and operations. We bring a lot of business acumen to that role, as well as extensive years of experience in the information security space. But then there's a secondary component, which a lot of organizations are struggling with today, where there are requirements through regulatory and other avenues where they are required to have a named information security officer. And a lot of times those organizations don't necessarily have a full-time need for that. And to give that as a partial role to someone internally, they don't necessarily get the depth of expertise. So our offering is designed to be able to give them a fractional experienced chief information security officer and be able to drive their security posture and their security organization forward without them necessarily needing to commit to a full-time employee in their budget and in their organization.
Thank you, Skeet Spillane and Tim Martin, for being with us today and sharing these insights. For our audience, thank you for listening to Frazier and Deeter's Culture of Compliance podcast, and please join us for our next episode.